Hi, and thanks for joining this session. Today we are going to look at a recipe I recently created, vinyl flooring. How to create it to be production ready while keeping reusability in mind. My name is Vincent Dérozier, and I currently live in Quebec, Canada, where I am a senior lead content in a video game studio. What you see here is a photo of me in summer. And here's a portrait from my daughter that is much more accurate for what I heard. I have been lucky to work in the video game industry for the past 15 years now. I work on a car game, action adventures, a few Assassin's Creed games, multiplayer, solo, open world environment sections, and linear levels. I'm mainly focusing on environment data such as natural assets like rocks and trees, architecture, decorations, and material. Some things about me I don't share much. I have a classical art background, a conceptual draftsman diploma from Émile Cole in France. Thanks for this training and my parents, I have a deep passion for art fundamentals and creation in general. I have a thing for stylized characters, and that's why I specialize in realistic environment. Here are a few projects I have done on my spare time, mostly as a freelancer. My latest published professional works are from Assassin's Creed Shadows, which was really a funny production. My work on it went from actual 3D assets and raw artworks to asset texturing, as well as tilables, either for in-game use or external libraries. I have been mentoring the past few years on skill tree and experience points, but also creating learning data and presentations such as the survival kit for Substance Designer, for those who heard of it. I also did a free introduction course to material creation about tilables and trims. And more recently, I created The Art of Texturing, a software agnostic free course meant to share the biggest artistic fundamentals used in texturing. Aside from that, a few months ago, I built a little liminal space environment, a basic corridor. Like any personal project, I will never finish it. But that's not the point. For me, personal projects are sandboxes to test out things on my spare time, playing with EV and cycles in Blender, baking few assets, or simply using mid-res or layered texture for others. There was a lot of fun little things in this scene, but we only have 30 minutes, so today we are going to focus on the vinyl floor recipe. Like everyone, I always start by creating a visual brief, like this. It's a glimpse of the references I used. After that, depending on your technical context, you can decide of a material dispatch. The technical context is what shader do you have and what features does it hold? To keep things simple, let's pretend you have a blend shader, a simple lerp between two layers, which is, in my opinion, a very basic and solid foundation. Here is a lerp between a slick and a worn plaster, just for the sake of the example. I'm not going to teach you guys what a lerp is. With that context, I will focus on creating two vinyl floors, a slick and a worn one. Having only two layers, I will push the worn one as far as possible before becoming too heavy visually. So let's dive in Substance Designer. So here we are in Substance Designer. As I said, we are going to look at two SBS. So here you have the slick and the worn one. Both are built on the same structure. So inside both of the SBS, you have two graphs. So the 8 map, you could say the sculpt, basically, and the layering. So here is the 8 map for the slick version. Here you have the layering for the slick version, so and so on and so on. So again, because we have only 30 minutes, we are going to focus on the biggest step, and hopefully you will have few interesting tips in it. So for example, here on the 8 map of the slick version, what is, in my opinion, interesting here is that obviously, from the left to the right, you have the very beginning with the tag generator, the structure, but what I found interesting here, at least for me, was the creation of the wrinkles, the little ripples, and the normal tweak. So for the wrinkles, what I did is that I use a crystal directional blur inflate with a mosaic, so pretty classic. And I use and rely a lot, you will see on the graph, on the non-uniform rotation grayscale, which here is perfect because it only works with materials that are in a square structure. After that, I just use that little Perlin noise, use the same trick, and the idea was, I can show you quickly, to add this kind of breakup. So it's almost done because it's a slick version. Most of the work is going to happen on the layering phase. But before jumping into that, here I use a very simple trick that is very useful, especially on very flat surface, is to avoid to have a straight 8 to normal. I know it's not really a PBR purist friendly. It's just that it would require of me to edit the 8 map a lot to have this kind of finition, where here with only 2 nodes, I can have something that is a bit more, for those who are old, a bit old like me, a bit more crazy bumpy. But basically what it does is that it merges all the shapes and avoid to have something that is too contrasted, which is something you want to avoid in an environment. So here let's jump on the layering. So at the end of the previous graph, I expose a normal, a basic roughness, ID map, and a custom grunge. So here, what I did, we are going to focus on the layering again. So here you have what I call usually the macro dispatch. So it's really where you are just creating the rough stack of your surface from a bank or anything. Here is the global combine, a little bit like in Painter. When you are baking something, it's automatically creating combine from your textures and using those for the mask generator and all. After that, I have artistic tweaks that we will take a look in a minute. And here the final layering and little breakup. So just here to take a look at the surface itself, I started with a bank material. So even on my personal projects, I slowly build my own library. So every time I'm doing something, I try to be as clean as possible without turning crazy, and just put that on a personal performance so I can keep everything tidy. So here I just have that very basic surface with few exposed material, few exposed preset. And here what I did is that just from that SBS, I can create 2 versions, the cream and the green one. Right after that, I just set it up to the right size, a slight sharpen. I break up the orientation just to be able to have something that have a bit of randomness. And I just blend it back with itself. So what you have here is basically a macro dispatch. In production, we call that a first draft or a L1. The purpose of that guy, and it could be even simpler, it could be just a cream and green square, is just to be able to have a placeholder in game and to map your UV, right? So just after that, what I have is the next step. So it's basically combining the map that we saw in the graph just before that to have the material starting to flesh out. So I'm going to just simply build on top of that. So here's my base on the left, and then I will tweak. So it could be a little bit like if you are using a Lovell on your roughness or HSL in Painter on your material, it's exactly what is happening here on the side. So the main and interesting step for me is this one. So I'm going to show you guys. So the idea was to move from that step to that. So it can be a bit subtle, so I'm going to exaggerate it a little bit. So what I have, let me showcase here on the screen. I just move from something that was a bit vanilla, a bit flat, to something that has a bit more personality. So again, it's for a slick material, but you never really want to create something that is brand new. It's really something that is really hard to work with, especially in video game. You want to infuse a little bit of of storytelling and context in your surface to break the artificial feeling of it. So here, for that step, I use a trick that I use very, very often is to rely a lot on thickness. If you don't know how to generate a thickness, it's pretty straightforward. So you take any 8 map you have, you just invert it, create an ambient occlusion from it. Any ambient occlusion really will work, but the RTO could work. Here it's an HBAO, it's okay. And then you just histoselect in it, just to be able to read info. And don't think it's like exactly like inverting just an ambient occlusion. It's really not the same. You are going to have very different breakup. You are really going to have thickness info when you are going to be on the edge or outer rim of a shape. So basically, it's how I build that little guy, and I really like, personally, to use that for every type of patina or dirt. It's really work really well. So after that, when you have the section, you highlight a place. For example, on your surface, what you want is to add frequencies, probably. So what I did here is that I just created that custom grunge. So I use a grunge from Inside Designer and just broke the pattern using, again, my friend, the non-uniform rotation grayscale, and I just blend it back here, clamp it with a level, and use that guy here. So I use it here on the roughness, and I use it here to drive a bit of info on the color again, right? After that, just to wrap up things, on some of my references, I had a few breakup that felt like, okay, there was some water, and then it just dry out, but it's kind of leaving some marks, and I find that very interesting. So the idea is you just go back here, take your mask, clamp it, do an edge detect, slide blur, non-uniform blur to just inflate the selection. Remember to have very low sample and low blaze because you want those artifacts. After that, you just blend it back with the previous steps. So you are starting to have sharp and soft info, and you can quantize it slightly. So what it does, again, it's something like that. So depending on what you want, it could become a filter, anything. So it's just a setup I use very often, especially on ground or decoration, trim, and stuff like that. So basically, after that, here is a little trick. So again, if you are a PBR purist, I'm sorry. So what I do very often on floors is that I create a mask, like that guy. So I'm trying to isolate the center of my tiles. It's something I use quite a lot on ceramic, on shadows, Odyssey, you name it. And the idea is to basically, if you're familiar with ZBrush, you do a sculpt or you take a scan and you want to clean it at some point to have a better eye circulation, something more appealing. And what you are going to do is to select the edge polish, and just polish the center of the tiles, right? So here is basically what is happening. So it's a homemade edge polish on the normal. I'm not doing that on the roughness, not doing that on the base color, not doing that on the 8 map. It's on purpose. I just want the light to bounce faster in the center, but not to lose information in all of my textures. So again, it's a bit of an hack, and it's working, at least for me. Here, after that, just to wrap up the slick version, I have that guy that I'm like using very often. It's a very generic soil I made, and I use it every time I need to just add a bit of dust, add a bit of marks on something, just to be able to have to create something that have interesting breakup. That way, I don't have to recreate a material inside my material. I can share it with other stuff. So here, the same goes with the little scratches, moving on a little bit faster. And at the end, just to wrap up the material, I added a bit of salt or sand. So basically, I just have that atlas laying around on my personal library. What I do is that I use it for pebbles, small pebbles, but also sand. It works very well for that. So looking at that, you could think, okay, so what is the point of all of that? I could have stayed with the first step here. So just to show you, and again, it's really subjective, but it's something I talk very often with young artists or people just poking me around to know, okay, what makes a material more appealing than another one. And basically, it's this kind of stuff, so the stuff we were looking at. Here, it's just the straight-out layering. So the material, they have detail, and if you just layer them, they are correct, you know? Yeah, they are PBR, right? But here, there is a lot of info, there is a lot of contrast, there's a lot going on. But if you take a look at all the manipulation we made, even though they are very simple, all of them, they are just helping to enhance the eye circulation, the rhythm, the readability of shapes, and it's all boiled down to art fundamentals, right? So basically, it's what is happening here. When I'm saying that I'm enhancing a material, it's just that. So it's fairly artistic for me, but I'm a bit weird. So here, we are going to move to the one. So basically, this guy is the one, and it's the reason why I made that recipe. I really wanted to create this kind of cracks, even though it's not that intense on most of the vinyl flooring. It's also something that we do a lot in production, is that, okay, sometimes there is a bit of cracks, but you want control. You want to be able to have cracks anywhere at any time. So you need to put them, okay, on every tiles. But you need, again, to have rhythm, eye circulation, and all of that. So how do I do that here? So I'm not going to bore you guys with that part because I use a technique that is really famous. It's the copy paste. So I just reuse my graph here. Most of the main different steps are happening here to create that guy. So we're going to look into that. So basically how it happened is just a custom cell, a custom little cell here, so nothing crazy. Why the shapes are like that, very elongated, is because after that we are going to break it up, and you will see in a few seconds. So after the ID, edge detect, invert, non-uniform blur, a blur and a little pinch using a slope blur inverted, so nothing crazy here. Secondary breakup using directional warp, and the craziness is happening here, at least for me, voila. So you take the elongated shapes with the primary and secondary shapes, and you just rotate them randomly, and you have that setup that I found quite challenging at first, but that was pretty straightforward, right? After that, another feature that I found interesting on my reference were those corners that basically have some very interesting shapes. It's far from being perfect, but it's another setup that I found interesting to discover. So don't be like me, don't create this kind of setup. There is already inbuilt in Designer, but I don't know, I just created mine. After that, you use a non-uniform rotation again, and it's important because you don't want your shape to be continuous between your tiles, except if you want. You want those to be slightly independent. So after that, what I did is that I created a cheap fluid fill. So it's just random gradient. You can use a fluid fill, but I don't know, I did that. And I blended back on my custom cell. And most of the magic for those shapes is happening here with the quantize. You are basically highlighting those accidents that happen here that were very ugly. But here they are creating those big breakups with secondary cell shapes that were very hard to do in another way, for me at least. After that, fairly simple, so bevel, slope blur to chisel a bit the things. Here I just duplicate partially my graph to create smaller bits and put those in the corner, so it's a detail, it's not mandatory. And something else just to wrap up that guy, I also, when I'm doing cracks like that, especially on rubber, plaster as well, what I like is to cracks the peak of the volume. So it's another setup that is fairly simple, so you just go back, select your peaks, and just remove it back from the result. So at the end, I finish with an 8 map looking like that. And as you can see, my normal is, again, not really an 8 to normal straight out. So don't be too worried. Most of the time, I just use an 8 to normal, but here, I just prefer to have a lot of control for that aesthetic I was aiming at. So let me show you that little guy as well, if you're not familiar with it. So just to avoid to have this kind of filling and finish something very sharp that would look like glass or rocks. What I did is that I used that little guy, which is a bent normal. So the bent normal have naturally more amplitude because it has ambient occlusion info inside the normal, and it's not as physically accurate than having a perfect 8 map to normal, etc. But for me, what was very interesting is that in one node, I was able to have a look that I was looking for. So again, I use that guy, blend it back with my previous step, combine a bit of accident here and there, and again, use the same trick just to have something. Let me zoom a little bit, just to have this kind of setup. So all of the secondary breakup and little accident, they are coming from that feeling of crazy bumpy artifacts that are squarish, and I was really looking for that. So those artifacts, they are here on purpose, and yeah, I like this kind of aesthetic. So after that, we are going to finish on the layering of that guy. So again, the graph here was very similar from here to there, and the main difference, they are in the layering. So fairly quick here, my macro texturing, you can see there is already different breakup, but it's really the same kind of thing we saw in the slick version. The main difference is happening here. I have the normal combined, but I also have custom chunks. So those little atlases, they were very interesting for me. At first, I put them in my 8 map, but it doesn't make any sense because there is a pattern, there is a directionality in the pattern you want to atlas on top of your material. So you want to keep those when there is directionality in a different layer, right? So let me go back here. So after that, what I did is I slightly discolored my color, and I also created that little guy, which is basically the underlayer on this type of vinyl flooring. Spoiler alert, so if you have vinyl floor in your home and it's looking like that under it, you need to call someone because it might have asbestos. But basically, I learned that on Google. But basically, I found the contrast interesting. It's concrete with mastic, and it's turning black because of the material. And I just found it very interesting when I was breaking apart the stuff. Here it's the roughness trick we saw early on. And I want to just show you quickly from here to there what is happening again artistically to the normal and the enhancing of the material. So it's fairly the same stuff, but here because there is much more information, at least for me it's more interesting. So let me show you. You can see it's not an ambient occlusion, it's really a thickness. If you go here, you are never going to have this kind of breakup and features just with an ambient occlusion. You can use an ambient occlusion for your aging and patina, no problem. But in my opinion, for wood, for stone, for a lot of stuff, most of my material, I just age them using this kind of trick, which is really interesting. And again, you use that and you can break things up with a grunge to add a bit of frequency, no stress. So after that, I basically have from here to there the same kind of result with a bit of feature, like I said, a bit of grunge information, and I wrap it up with the same guy we saw, so the outer line of humidity. So moving on to the final step. So here I have my guy, my little soil and the little sand parts. And at this point, we are basically at the same step at the end of the slick material we saw. So the main difference here is that I wanted to push it, like I said, further, so like that. If you have material layering in the Unreal, in Unity, in whatever, that have more layer than 2, keep those steps for after. But if you don't, it's okay to bake more info, like more detail, not the more non-PBR info, obviously. And so here what I did is that from that step, I just add a bit of moisture info just to prepare my surface to what was coming in afterward. And here is basically what I usually call the atlas factory. So it's at the end when it's raining atlases on my material. So I have all of those little homemade atlases. You can take some on internet, there is no stress. Most of my atlases, or like all of them, I just do them in ZBrush and then just Z-grab my map and run away in Designer, layered some colors, some noise, and that's it. At least for me, it's doing the trick, or the coffee, like we said in French. And basically, after that, it's just raining atlases. So we can look at it raining. It's basically from here to there, and I'm just slowly building up my layers. The main difference between all of those is just that the ones that are very organic, I can use masks like that are very organic, grungy, and all. But if you want control, you just need to put a mask that is sharper in terms of info. You want to keep a detail somewhere, you just need to create a very sharp and specific mask for that. And at the end, it's almost done. I just really like when I use this kind of setup to add a bit of extra dirt on top. It really helps to avoid to have something that is completely clean, because nothing really is. There is always sand, there is always dirt, there is always something linking every element together. And I have also that guy that is basically just roughness, balancing. So again, just to show you guys, the idea was just, again, to create something that would be more appealing than just having, like, let's say, let me take that guy, a straight out layering from the first draft. Again, that guy, a first draft like that, if you don't have the time that can ship, it's okay. But if you have the time, doing like the extra step, like a few hours of work like that, in my opinion, is really important. And it's what is going to create an environment that is appealing or more readable. And it's one of the main topics I always share with people poking me around. So we are going to go back on the presentation. Okay. So to summarize, instead of creating two static graphs with everything baked in it, I rely a lot on layering. On top of speed and control, it really helps to have reusability, because you can reuse a lot of those in other materials, share it with other artists in-house or outside. I always try to be as deterministic as possible in my processes when it comes to material creation. It really helps to push the visual and keep consistency, which are vital in production. I use those processes a lot in my works, not just in my personal works on the side. The underlayer here is the soil you saw. And you can appreciate, I think, the layer of atlases here. Here it's just the atlas. You can see the amount of it. It's the type of processes I also use professionally. This guy have surface layering, normal polish, atlas scattering, roughness enhancing, everything. For me, it's useful artistically and time-wise, and it works for realistic or non-realistic data, especially if you're aiming for a grounded aesthetic, like a traditional painting or etude doc. It's less a matter of aesthetic than frequencies and eye circulation. So this concludes my little session. I hope you find it interesting and discovered a few tricks. Thank you. And here are my personal info in case any of you have questions about this demo or the industry in general, don't hesitate. And do we have time for one question? I don't think so. Yeah, one question? Okay, let's go. If you have question, or I will be outside, no stress.
Hello. So Amazing presentation. I had a question. Do you always do the material all by yourself, or do you sometimes have to expose parameters for other artists, maybe other material artists?
Both. Basically, I work at a lot of steps in production. Most of the time, I try to expose material, to expose parameters, sorry, but what I try to do is two things, and most of them I learned them from Adobe, is to have as less as possible exposed parameters, something that load very fast, and try to be consistent. It's like the two things that are very important. As less as possible, and to have exactly the same structure in all your materials. So color, roughness, and all. If you want to know how to do it the best, I think just go on Substance source and download few material, and it's clear as day. It's exactly how you should build your preset.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We don't really have time for the question, but you can go ask Vincent after. I think we stop here.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, guys.